Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, December 13th, 2020, and today we're going to be taking a look at the surprises of the 2020 Senate election. So this is actually going to be a multi-part series. I started one on the presidential race, and now we're actually going to dabble into the results of the Senate elections and talk about some of the more surprising results. So here are the Senate results from the 2020 election, and as you can see, both parties, neither of them are in the majority. The Republicans currently hold 50 seats. The Democrats currently hold 48. But I do think that it's worth noting that the Democratic Party had ample opportunities to actually pick up the United States Senate, but they didn't. And that's due to, Donald Trump being on the ballot really helping a number of Republicans. Republicans did not perform this well really in other years, especially presidential election years. It's a general understanding that when we have a presidential race, the Democratic Party typically does better. They did pick up seats in the Senate, but they lost seats in the House of Representatives, but the Senate was nowhere near where they needed to be. The Democrats have only gained a net one seat in the United States Senate. So the elections did not exactly turn out how they wanted it to go. And all of the toss-up races, and I mean literally all of them, went to the Republican Party. But let's go ahead and take a look at these four specific states that I think are sort of, shockers. I think that these are states that I expected to either be narrower or expected to go one way or another. And I think that these states really need a reassessment. Now, it could just be the factor of the incumbency for one of these states. And I think that once this incumbent does leave, that the Democratic Party will have a very easy opportunity of picking it up. But this election should have been the election where that occurred, especially in some of these other states where the election results weren't exactly as narrow as we thought they would be. So a lot of these states are in the same general region, and I'm not actually going to be focusing too much on some other states until my next video. I do have a couple of other states lined up to talk about then. But the first state we're going to be talking about is the state of Georgia. Now, I know Georgia may have shocked some of you guys. When we saw Georgia go blue on election night, many of us weren't expecting that to occur. But what surprised me wasn't the runoff election that was expected to happen in the Senate special election. It was actually David Perdue's seat. I didn't expect David Perdue to drop below 50%. I thought that he would narrowly win the race. But it ended up going into a runoff, and I was kind of surprised by that. Joe Biden I did expect to win the presidential race. I predicted that he would win Georgia by a tilt margin, and he did. But I also predicted that David Perdue would win the state of Georgia Senate election by a tilt margin. I really underestimated the impact of a Libertarian Party candidate. I didn't see that over 100,000 people would vote for a Libertarian Party candidate. That also may be a little daunting for Democrats entering into this runoff election. But David Perdue received 49.7% of the vote, and I was actually surprised. When it came down to a point where David Perdue was no longer the projected winner in the United States Senate election, some networks had made the projection that he was going to win or that there would not be a runoff, which eventually, would mean that David Perdue wins the race. But as the results were, ticking down, we saw David Perdue drop to a point where he was at 50.01%. And that's when I knew, and that's when many of us knew, that we would no longer know who will be in the Senate majority after the election. And David Perdue, Jon Ossoff, now entering into a runoff race. So this state in particular has surprised many people. I wasn't too surprised about the presidential results. I was more so surprised about the fact that David Perdue and Jon Ossoff are now facing off in a runoff election come January 5th, 2021. The next state I'm going to talk about is actually a state connected to it, the state of South Carolina. Lindsey Graham handily defeated Jamie Harrison. This was the most expensive Senate race the entire election cycle, over $100 million raised on both sides. Lindsey Graham was saying, Jamie Harrison was killing him fundraising-wise, and he was right. For a very significant period of time, Jamie Harrison was raising a lot more money. And not to say that a 10-point loss is the worst case possible for the Democrats in a state such as South Carolina, but you do have to realize that Jamie Harrison probably should have ran ahead Biden by a lot larger than he did. And also, Jamie Harrison didn't hit the peak for Democrats in South Carolina. We've seen statewide Democrats get 44.5 to 45% of the vote, and that seems to be their peak. Jamie Harrison was slightly under, but the fact that even with over $100 million that it couldn't be reached there, I think is a testament that you shouldn't nationalize elections. Lindsey Graham went to Fox News. He went to, every media outlet necessary in order to win over a lot of these voters. Lindsey Graham and Jamie Harrison debated. Lindsey Graham was clearly afraid of losing this Senate race. The data was telling us that this race was competitive. But then on election day, especially in a number of other states as well, the Republican Party won over the overwhelming majority of these undecided voters in these polls. And Lindsey Graham, while previously not a too staunch a proponent of President Trump, he won a lot of the support, all of the support of President Trump's supporters. So Lindsey Graham won by a 10-point margin. I thought it would be narrower. Many of us expected it to be narrower. There's a lot of money in this race on the Democratic side, but it wasn't Kentucky. We knew it wasn't Kentucky, and it was somewhat narrow on the presidential results. So South Carolina kind of surprised me that Lindsey Graham won by such a large margin, but then again, you do have to realize it's ruby red South Carolina. It hasn't voted for a Democrat in, half a century. So it wouldn't necessarily make sense that Jamie Harrison was going to be the first one to do so, especially when Donald Trump was on the ballot, but we did expect it to be narrower, but that obviously was not the case. The next state is also connected coincidentally to the state of Georgia and South Carolina, and that is the state of North Carolina, when Thom Tillis defeated Cal Cunningham in this state. Now, he defeated him by almost 2 points. This was a state that should have gone to the Democratic Party. Cal Cunningham, like many Democrats we've seen across some of these states, scandal-plagued, or really just tied to things that aren't necessarily supposed to be viewed for a politician. Now, I don't really see why that was an argument that resonated very well with the same people that were. I would argue that President Trump did not have the best history in terms of handling anything with women. We all know that. We know that that's something that he was vilified for by the left wing for the past 4 years and prior to that. But Cal Cunningham was easily pushed away from winning this seat from a scandal that many of us thought would have no impact. Following that election, the majority of the voters in the state said it didn't really impact their vote. So either they're lying or Cal Cunningham was already destined to lose. Now, I didn't think that Cal Cunningham was going to have a sweeping victory. I thought he would win. I thought that he would run ahead of Joe Biden. We've seen very standard Democrats do very well in the state of North Carolina, not necessarily nationally known names. But Cal Cunningham, far from being a nationally known name, rose to popularity amongst Democrats nationwide, received a lot of money, millions of dollars funded into this race because many people thought that this was a very winnable race. Thom Tillis, relatively unknown as a senator, his approval rating isn't too high if you take a look at it. And Cal Cunningham was consistently running ahead of Thom Tillis in terms of the pre-election data. So Democrats thought that this would be a very good opportunity for a pickup. But a lot of us did realize that if Cal Cunningham was to win the state of North Carolina on the Senate election, Joe Biden would likely have to win the state. And when Joe Biden ran behind and ended up losing the state, we knew that Cal Cunningham would be losing it with him. But I just find it fascinating that Cal Cunningham did not outperform Joe Biden like we expected him to. He just didn't do it. And that's one thing that the Democratic Party is going to have to reassess. Maybe they should be running races because this race wasn't as nationalized as the neighboring South Carolina. Maybe that's why it's narrower, but it's also a much more Democratic-friendly state, if you could even call it Democratic-friendly at all. But Cal Cunningham, that was a shocker. I really expected him to win. Many of us expected him to win, and I think that was a really big blow to the Democratic Party once they realized that Cal Cunningham was not going to win the North Carolina Senate race. This is a state that they have been trying. The Democratic Party has been trying time and time again. They tried in 2016 and lost. They tried in 2020 and lost. They tried in 2014 and lost. And now there's a race up in 2022, an open seat. We could see a very similar result where the Democrat just narrowly runs behind the Republican, but it's a 6-year term. That's a very long period of time for the Democrats to be out of power in the state of North Carolina. So North Carolina surprised us, but not as surprising as this final state. This state is not connected to North Carolina or Georgia or South Carolina. It's connected to practically the ocean. Now, this is the state of Maine. This is Susan Collins' seat. She won this race by a very, very, very large margin. Now, the reason why I wouldn't read too much into Susan Collins' practically, 8-point victory is because Lisa Savage, she received 5% of the vote. Maine has this thing called ranked choice voting, and I can almost guarantee that 80 to 90% of those Lisa Savage voters were going to vote for Sarah Gideon on their second ballot. But it didn't end up going to that second ballot. So Susan Collins technically did win by 8 points, but you do also have to realize that 5% for the independent wasn't necessarily, we hate both candidates vote. It was because Maine provides voters the opportunity to rank their voters, and Gideon still probably would have lost by 5-6 points, but it's not this 8-point, defeat, I would say. But also, I think that this is an astonishing and a very outstanding victory for Susan Collins. She should not have won the Senate race. This state is a Democratic state. Unarguably, Maine is a Democratic state, but Susan Collins has tapped into this voting base, and she's one of the last standing Republicans in New England, and rightfully so. She's one of the few that's labeled herself as bipartisan. Many of the others have tried to tackle on to Donald Trump. We've actually seen that not just necessarily in New England, but in other states. We see Colorado Senator Cory Gardner jump on to Donald Trump. He would have had a much easier pathway to re-election had he remained that supposedly bipartisan senator. But Susan Collins, she says she's bipartisan, but also has voted with Donald Trump a very significant portion of time. And that's one of the main playing points from the Gideon campaign. And I really think that this race was the biggest shocker of the entire Senate elections. People were like, okay, they discussed North Carolina. They said North Carolina, okay, he's going to the GOP. That's not unexpected. Georgia goes to the GOP. Not unexpected. South Carolina, Texas, Kansas, Montana, Iowa. But Maine voted for Joe Biden by double digits this election, and now voting for Susan Collins by 8 points. That is an 18-point swing in terms of Biden voters to Republican voters on the Senate ballot. That is super significant. And when you're looking at where, Susan Collins performed against Sarah Gideon, you do have to realize that Susan Collins still had that factor of the incumbency. She still had that base to hold on to. She still had all of these supporters that viewed her as bipartisan, and that is something that really drove her to victory. So that is the final state I want to talk about. I'll probably do a more in-depth analysis about certain states that I find to be the most interesting, especially Maine, especially North Carolina, and Georgia once we get the runoff results. But those are my 4 main states that I would consider to be the surprises of the 2020 Senate elections. So stay tuned for part 2. And thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election videos, just to change things up a little bit. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.